There was no applause, no celebration, no victory speeches, only quiet understanding. As the family prepared to leave, their father looked back once more at the employees standing together. "Justice isn't about destroying people," he said. "It's about making sure this never happens again." No one answered because nothing needed to be added. The greatest victory that afternoon was not power defeating weakness. It was bitterness being left behind, allowing accountability, compassion, and dignity to become the story everyone carried home together from that unforgettable terminal. The quiet dignity that ended the confrontation did not end the story. By sunrise, accountability had moved beyond the airport terminal. News alerts spread across the country, and every major network redirected its attention toward the airline's headquarters, where a different kind of judgment was about to begin. Long before dawn, satellite trucks filled the streets outside the headquarters. Reporters adjusted microphones while camera crews searched for the best angles as producers repeated the same question through their headsets. "Are they coming out yet?" One veteran journalist looked across the growing crowd. "This stopped being one passenger complaint last night," she said. "People want to know whether this company protects fairness or protects itself." As daylight slowly broke, black executive vehicles entered through the front gates. Flashing cameras followed every movement. Senior leaders stepped from their cars without their usual confidence. No one smiled for photographs. No one waved. They walked quietly toward the entrance while reporters called after them. Will anyone be held responsible? Did leadership know about previous complaints? Is the CEO speaking today? None of the executives answered. Inside office buildings, restaurants, schools, and living rooms, millions watched the unfolding coverage. Social media no longer focused only on the twins. People began comparing earlier complaints, sharing personal experiences, and questioning statements they had once accepted without hesitation. One television commentator observed, "Public trust rarely disappears in one moment. It fades each time evidence becomes stronger than official explanations." Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere remained just as heavy. Every prepared statement was reviewed again. Every sentence became shorter. An advisor finally admitted, "If we sound defensive, we've already lost." During the live briefing, each pause between answers seemed louder than the microphones themselves. Reporters noticed hesitant glances, unfinished thoughts, and careful breathing. Silence exposed pressure more honestly than rehearsed language ever could. Then investigators presented archived complaints dating back several years. The room grew still. A board member quietly asked, "Why weren't these warnings fully addressed?" Nobody offered an immediate answer. The CEO slowly stood. "I'm not here to defend failure," he said. "Policies are meaningless if they fail people. Today we accept responsibility, not because cameras are watching, but because accountability should never require public pressure." Every reporter stopped typing. He continued, "No position, including my own, stands above integrity. If trust is broken, leadership must repair it with action, not excuses." When the press conference ended, the conversation had permanently changed. The airline was no longer discussing image management. It had begun rebuilding its future through honesty, reform, and the difficult choice to place justice ahead of reputation. By the time the press conference ended, the conversation had already escaped the walls of headquarters. Reporters rushed to upload breaking updates while television networks replayed the airline's statement beside newly released surveillance footage. Across the country, millions opened the videos expecting another heated confrontation they thought they already understood. Instead, they found something entirely different. The first recording began without dramatic music or edited captions. It simply showed the twins approaching the boarding gate with quiet smiles and valid first-class boarding passes. "I've got both passes ready," one sister said politely. The gate agent accepted them, glanced briefly at the screen, then looked back at the sisters with a noticeably colder expression. "These can't be right." The younger twin blinked. I'm sorry? These boarding passes aren't matching what I'm expecting. Could you please check again? Her sister asked gently. I already did. People watching the footage paused the video. Wait, one online commenter wrote. She never actually checked a second time. Another replied, I believed the short clip. This changes everything. As more camera angles appeared, every detail matched perfectly. There were no missing moments, no hidden confrontation, no aggressive behavior waiting outside the edited version that had circulated for days. The sisters never interrupted. They never argued. They never raised their voices. Instead, one quietly asked, could someone please explain what the problem is? The request received no meaningful answer. Inside homes, offices, classrooms, and airport lounges, viewers watched in growing silence. A television host removed her glasses and stared at the monitor. So everything we've heard until now was missing the beginning. Her co-anchor nodded slowly. The beginning changes the entire story. Online discussions shifted almost immediately. I judged them, assumed they were causing trouble. I never questioned the edited clip. Another message spread. Quickly, they gave every instruction. They stayed respectful. Why were they treated like suspects? The footage continued. Security approached. One officer asked calmly, Ladies, we'd like you to step aside. Without hesitation, the older sister answered, Of course. We'll cooperate. There was no resistance, no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, only patience. Investigators reviewing public reaction noticed something unusual. People were no longer arguing with each other. They were asking themselves uncomfortable questions instead. Why did I believe confidence over evidence? Why did I trust the accusation before seeing the facts? Those questions spread faster than the original accusations ever had. Inside the airline, employees gathered quietly around conference room screens. A supervisor lowered his head. I defended the report. Another answered softly. So did I. Neither man looked away from the footage. The recordings continued showing each interaction exactly as investigators had described. Every request made by the sisters remained respectful. Every response from the employees became progressively firmer despite no change in the twins' behavior. One executive whispered, There was never a threat. Another replied, Only an assumption. Across social media, comment sections transformed. I'm sorry I contributed to this. I should have waited. This could have happened to anyone judged before being heard. Parents shared the videos with their children. Teachers discussed them in classrooms. Community leaders encouraged conversations about first impressions and unconscious bias. The twins never posted statements demanding sympathy. They never celebrated public support. When a reporter finally reached them outside their hotel, she asked, How does it feel knowing millions are watching your story? The older sister smiled gently. I hope they aren't only watching us. The reporter frowned. What do you mean? I hope they're watching themselves. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then the younger sister added quietly, If people leave this story only feeling sorry for us, nothing changes. If they leave asking better questions before judging someone, then maybe something good can come from it. That brief exchange spread almost as widely as the surveillance footage itself. People shared it because it lacked bitterness. It carried no revenge, only hope. By the end of the week, the complete recordings had reached millions of viewers across the country. The videos no longer represented a single airline dispute or one family's painful experience. They became enduring evidence that dignity can withstand prejudice, that truth often arrives more quietly than accusation, and that justice begins the moment people choose careful observation over comfortable assumptions before deciding who deserves respect. The release of the videos had changed opinion, but inside the airline's headquarters, another decision carried even greater weight. The board could no longer respond with statements alone. Behind closed doors, directors gathered knowing the future of the company depended on what they chose to protect: reputation or integrity. Phones remained active throughout the night as executives shared updates and reviewed the public response. Nobody discussed minimizing damage or controlling headlines. The conversation focused on understanding how the situation had been allowed to happen. Files that had once remained buried were placed across the conference table. Previous complaints, employee concerns, and passenger reports were reviewed. Directors realized the boarding gate incident was not an unexpected accident, but a warning they had failed to recognize. One board member quietly said, "We cannot fix what we refuse to see." For years, policies had existed on paper promising fairness and professionalism. Yet the investigation revealed that written rules could not prevent unfair treatment when assumptions influenced decisions. The board recognized that compliance without compassion could still create harm. Executives who once believed procedures would protect them now faced questions. The evidence showed that following a process was not enough if people were treated differently because of who they were. The leadership team understood that one employee's decision reflected a larger environment where certain behaviors had been overlooked. Accountability had to reach beyond one person and examine the culture that allowed the mistake to continue. The vote came after hours of discussion. Directors approved independent investigations, stronger employee training, and reviews of workplace practices. The decision was unanimous because everyone understood the cost of choosing silence. Some careers changed after that meeting. Positions were lost, responsibilities shifted, and leaders who ignored warnings faced consequences. Yet the board knew rebuilding trust required more than removing names from offices. It required proving that the airline valued people before appearances. The company announced reforms designed to create change. Employees were reminded that respect was not reserved for influential passengers or protected by status. Every traveler deserved dignity from the moment they entered the airport. When the meeting ended, the board members left knowing their hardest decision had also been their most necessary one. They chose honesty over comfort, responsibility over denial, and reform over reputation. The airline's future would not be defined by the mistake that exposed its weakness, but by the courage to finally correct it. The board's decision had changed the direction of the airline, but true accountability required something deeper than policy changes and public statements. It required the people involved to face the human cost of what had happened. For the gate agent, that moment arrived when she finally stood before the twins without a counter between them. The confidence she once carried at the boarding gate had disappeared. The same person who had spoken with certainty now sat quietly, listening to the evidence that showed how quickly assumptions had replaced fairness. Every decision she made returned to her mind with painful clarity. She remembered the moment she looked at the twins and saw suspicion. Before seeing people, the room remained quiet as she turned toward them. "I never really saw you," she whispered. The sentence was simple, but everyone understood its meaning. She was not only admitting that she failed to recognize their situation, she was admitting that she allowed assumptions to hide their humanity. The twins listened without anger. They did not interrupt, criticize, or demand more punishment. Their calm presence made the moment heavier because they showed the same dignity they had carried from the beginning. Investigators explained how each decision had followed assumptions instead of evidence. The boarding passes were real. The information was correct. The sisters had remained respectful. Yet suspicion had arrived before facts. The gate agent lowered her eyes. "I thought I was following my instincts," she admitted. A supervisor quietly responded, "Sometimes instincts are built from things we never question." Nobody argued after that. The silence in the room became more powerful than any accusation. Everyone present had to consider their own role. The passengers who watched, the employees who stayed quiet, and the people who accepted a first impression without asking for the truth. Several witnesses looked uncomfortable as they remembered standing nearby. They realized injustice does not always happen through loud actions. Sometimes it grows when people choose not to interfere. The conversation was no longer about a single mistake or a company investigation. It became about responsibility. The gate agent offered an apology without excuses. "I am sorry for making you feel like you did not belong." The twins accepted her words with quiet understanding. The apology could not remove what happened, but it represented something important. The moment denial ended and accountability finally began. When the gate agent finally admitted the truth, the room understood that accountability was not only about consequences. It was about recognizing the human impact behind every decision. The apology created a moment of reflection, but the next words would come from someone who had every reason to demand more, and yet chose something different. The CEO walked toward the podium quietly. He did not begin with his position, his achievements, or the size of the company he led. He stood there as a father whose daughters had experienced something no parent wanted to witness. His expression carried concern, not anger. His focus was not protecting a reputation, but acknowledging a painful reality. He remembered the phone call. The moment his daughter's voice reached him, he knew something was wrong. They had never called him for special treatment. They had been raised to solve problems with patience and respect. Hearing uncertainty in their voices told him that this was not about a delayed flight. It was about dignity as he spoke. Parents throughout the room quietly listened and understood the fear behind his words. The fear of knowing your child is facing something unfair while you are not there to protect them. Then he looked toward the audience. They deserved respect. Before anyone knew my name, the sentence created a silence that felt heavier than applause. Everyone understood what he meant. His daughters should not have needed his authority to be treated fairly. Their worth did not come from their family name, their success, or their connection to power. They deserved the same respect as every other passenger standing at that gate. The CEO continued calmly. No parent should need a title to prove their child belongs. His voice never became angry. He never demanded revenge. Instead, he explained that a society fails when kindness appears only after discovering someone's importance. The room remained silent because there was nothing to defend. The people listening began to understand that true leadership was not measured by how someone used power against others. It was measured by how someone used power to protect fairness. The CEO asked for accountability, not punishment. He asked for change, not humiliation. His response showed that justice did not require another person's downfall to create a victory. Long after the speech ended, people remembered one message above everything else. Respect should arrive before recognition. A person's dignity should never depend on who they know, what they own, or what name they carry. It should exist simply because they are human. The CEO's message did not end the story at the podium. It carried into homes, conversations, and moments where people began remembering the day from their perspective. The gate was no longer a place where flights departed. It became a place where choices were made and where silence had meaning. Many passengers who had stood nearby found themselves thinking about their reactions. Some remembered looking away. Others remembered holding their phones instead of offering help. They had arrived at the airport expecting a journey, but they left carrying questions that followed them long after reaching their destinations. Several witnesses later admitted that they wished they had stepped forward sooner. They explained that they were uncomfortable, unsure, or afraid of making the situation worse. Yet many recognize the difficult truth that hesitation can allow unfair treatment to continue. Their silence had not created the injustice, but it had given it space. The hardest conversations began when children asked simple questions. Why did nobody help them? Parents struggled to answer because the question revealed something uncomfortable. It was easy to explain why someone acted unfairly, but much harder to explain why so many people watched and waited. Families across the country used the incident as an opportunity to discuss courage, respect, and responsibility. Around dinner tables, parents reminded their children that doing the right thing does not always require a powerful position. Sometimes it only requires one person willing to speak when everyone else remains quiet. The passengers slowly understood they were not just observers. Their reactions had become part of the story. Every person standing at that gate had made a choice, whether through action or silence, and those choices became a lesson shared far beyond the airport. The impact reached schools, workplaces, and communities. People discussed how quickly assumptions form and how important it is to question them. One painful moment became a reminder that change often begins when ordinary people decide they will not ignore what feels wrong. When flights finally continued, the terminal looked the same, but the atmosphere felt different. Employees approached travelers with more awareness, and passengers carried themselves with greater understanding. Respect entered the space before suspicion did. Months later, Terminal 7 remained a place filled with travelers. Yet those who remembered that day never saw it the same way again. They understood dignity should never depend on appearance, status, or a powerful name forever. The conversations created by that painful day did not disappear when the cameras stopped recording. Instead, they followed the airline into every meeting room, every training session, and every decision made behind the scenes. Leaders understood that apologies alone could not repair what had been damaged. Real change required action that passengers could experience, not just promises they could hear. The first reforms arrived quietly. There were no celebrations or attempts to present the airline as a hero for fixing its own mistakes. New policies focused on fairness, transparency, and protecting passenger dignity. The company finally accepted that responsibility was not about controlling the story, but about changing the conditions that allowed the story to happen. But employees experienced a different approach to training. Previous sessions had focused heavily on procedures and compliance. Now workers discussed real situations, difficult conversations, and the impact of assumptions. They were encouraged to question their own instincts and understand how quickly unconscious bias could influence decisions before facts were fully examined. The airline also welcomed independent reviewers. Outside voices were brought in to examine complaints, workplace culture, and decision-making practices. This step showed passengers that the company was willing to face uncomfortable questions instead of only investigating itself behind closed doors. At the gates, procedures changed. Employees received clearer instructions about verification, communication, and escalation. Decisions affecting passengers could no longer depend only on personal judgment during stressful moments. The goal was simple. Every traveler deserved the same level of fairness regardless of appearance, background, or assumptions across terminals. Old habits slowly began disappearing. Experienced employees and new staff members learned under the same expectations. Respect was no longer treated as a separate training topic. It became part of everyday work, shaping how employees spoke, listened, and responded to every passenger. Trust did not return overnight. Many people remembered what happened and remained cautious. But over time, travelers noticed small differences. A patient explanation, a respectful interaction, an employee willing to listen before making a decision. Those moments slowly rebuilt confidence. The airline learned that reputation could not be repaired by advertisements or carefully written statements. True credibility came from accepting failure and proving through action that change was real. Years later, employees still remembered the lesson behind that difficult moment. The incident that once exposed weakness became the reason the company strengthened itself. It reminded everyone that an airline's success is not measured only by flights reaching destinations, but by how every person is treated before the journey even begins. The reforms changed the airline's future, but the memory of what happened at Terminal 7 continued traveling far beyond the company itself. Even as daily operations returned to normal, the footage remained a powerful reminder of how quickly an ordinary interaction could reveal deeper problems hidden beneath the surface. Months passed, yet the recordings never disappeared. The videos continued appearing in documentaries, discussions, and educational programs. They were no longer viewed only as evidence from one painful incident. They became a lesson about judgment, responsibility, and the importance of seeing people clearly before creating conclusions about them. Training institutions began using the footage differently. Future security officers, customer service workers, and professionals responsible for public interactions studied the events carefully. They examined every moment, asking what could have been done differently. The lesson was simple. Authority means nothing without fairness, and procedures mean little without humanity. Across communities, conversations continued. Families, schools, and local groups discussed the incident not only by focusing on what went wrong, but by understanding why it happened. People reflected on how small assumptions can grow into serious harm when nobody chooses to question them. The twins, however, never wanted the attention. Despite thousands recognizing their names and praising their strength, they avoided turning their experience into personal fame. They believed the purpose was never to become famous for surviving injustice. The purpose was to make sure fewer people experienced it in the future. Whenever people watched the footage again, they discovered something new, a missed opportunity to help. A moment of hesitation, a decision influenced by assumption. Each replay encouraged viewers to look deeper and understand that injustice is often created through small choices before it becomes a visible event. The sisters' humiliation eventually faded from headlines, but their dignity remained. Their calm response became the part people remembered most. They proved that strength does not always appear through confrontation. Sometimes it appears through patience, self-control, and refusing to allow someone else's unfair actions to change who you are. The videos became more than recordings. They became reminders passed from one generation to another that justice requires awareness, courage, and compassion. Long after the cameras stopped, the lesson continued. Every person deserves respect before anyone decides what they are worth. The lessons carried by the videos eventually returned to the place where everything began. Months later, Terminal 7 stood as it always had, with travelers rushing, announcements echoing, and flights preparing for departure. Yet beneath the routine, something had changed. The twins walked through the same boarding area without the weight of suspicion following behind them. The gate that once represented humiliation now represented progress. Employees remembered the incident not with fear, but with a commitment to never repeat the choices that had caused so much pain. Passengers arriving that day experienced a different atmosphere. Gate agents greeted travelers with patience, answered questions carefully, and treated every person with equal respect. The changes were not dramatic or designed for attention. They appeared in small moments, proving that real reform is often measured through everyday actions rather than public promises. This time, no cameras waited. No reporters stood nearby. No strangers watched with curiosity. The sisters experienced the journey they had wanted from the beginning, a normal flight without judgment attached to their names, appearance, or background. Near the gate, a young girl suddenly stopped and looked closely at them. She recognized the faces she had seen across the internet and slowly approached with a smile. "Were you scared?" the girl asked. The question carried the feelings of millions who had watched the story unfold. One sister knelt beside her and answered softly, "Yes, we were scared, but we never let that fear decide who we would become." The girl listened, understanding a lesson bigger than the moment itself. As the twins boarded their flight, the terminal continued moving around them. But this time the silence felt different. It was no longer the silence of people watching injustice happen. It was the silence of a place learning to choose compassion before judgment. The airport eventually returned to its normal rhythm, but the meaning of that day never disappeared. Terminal 7 continued welcoming thousands of travelers, yet employees carried a different understanding with them. Every interaction now held a reminder that small decisions can leave lasting marks on people's lives. The twins' return to the same gate months later showed the world something important. The location had not changed, but the people inside it had. The same walls that once witnessed silence and suspicion now represented growth, reflection, and the possibility of doing better after failure. Many employees remembered the moment when they first learned the truth. They remembered how quickly assumptions had replaced facts and how easily a passenger could be judged before anyone truly listened. That memory became a quiet responsibility they carried into every future conversation with travelers. The story was never supposed to prove that power could solve injustice. Instead, it revealed something much deeper. The twins received fairness because their father had influence, but millions of others still deserved that same fairness without needing someone important to speak for them. That became the lesson people carried forward. Respect should not arrive only when a person's identity becomes impressive. It should exist before introductions, before titles, and before anyone discovers connections. A stranger at a gate deserves the same kindness as the person sitting in the most powerful office. The CEO's phone call changed the situation, but it did not create the truth. The truth was already there, waiting to be noticed. His involvement simply forced people to see what had been hidden behind routine decisions, policies, and assumptions that had been accepted for too long. Across communities, people continued discussing what happened. Some talked about the airline's reforms. Others talked about the passengers who watched quietly. Many realized that injustice does not survive only because of those who create it, but also because of those who choose comfort over courage. The witnesses who remained silent that day carried their own reflections afterward. They understood that helping does not always require dramatic action. Sometimes it begins with a simple question, a respectful challenge, or the willingness to say, "Something about this does not feel right." The twins never wanted people to remember them as victims. They wanted people to remember the lesson. Their strength came from refusing to allow cruelty to control their hearts. They proved that dignity can remain powerful even when someone else tries to take it away. Their father's position as a CEO was never the most important part of the story. The greatest moment came from two young women who chose patience when anger would have been easier. They showed that character is revealed when nobody expects kindness from you. In the end, justice did not arrive with revenge, shouting, or celebration. It arrived quietly through changed policies, honest conversations, and people choosing to see each other differently. The twins walked away without hatred, leaving behind a message that continued traveling. Because sometimes justice does not enter with noise. Sometimes it simply boards quietly, waits patiently, and changes everything by reminding humanity of what should have existed from the beginning: respect, fairness, and dignity for all. And that lesson remained long after the final flight departed, proving that true change begins when people choose humanity.